and are lighting our flaming chalice, and we begin. You've heard these opening words before. My sermon today has something to do with falling, and so I figured you could hear it again. This is autobiography in 5 short chapters by Portia Nelson. Chapter 1, I walk down the street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I am helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place, but it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is there. I still fall in. It's a habit. But my eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5. I walk down another street. And it's my guess there's a hole on that street as well. We'll sing. Come sing a song with me, number 346. And we join in the words of our unison affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia, y el servicio es su ley. Este es nuestro gran pacto. Vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en el amor y ayudarnos los unos a los otros. And los unos and los otros, introduce yourself to someone you may not know. We could do that all day. Pull it back together, everybody. Pull it back together. Good morning. One more time, good morning. Good morning if you are here for the very first time. Good morning if you have been here forever. If you are new, it is great to have you with us. There are blue connection cards to stay in touch with what goes on, and please visit our welcome table. Whatever is working or not working in your life, it is good for us to be together. This morning, Rich Doherty walked by my office and he said, "You know, this reminds me of the days on the farm." Of course. And he said, "You know, you're walking across a sloggy, muddy field and there's this icy rain coming down, and you know, it's the beginning of what's gonna be a bad day." It's still early. This morning, there will be a discussion of the service at its conclusion at 11:30, not at its conclusion, probably will conclude sooner than 11:30, but at 11:30 we'll join for a discussion upstairs, and at noon, Ron Cordes will be showing episode 1 of his epic history of Unitarian Universalism, Long Strange Trip, and that's happening at noon. And you may fortify yourself for these events by having a baked potato, a fully loaded baked potato, courtesy of the fundraising of our partner church committee. And I've also been implored to again remind people that the cabaret is coming, and there are umpteen pieces of literature in your order of service, so pay attention to those things, please. A program note. My sermon this morning is a test run of a sermon that I'm going to be preaching several times in the next few weeks. I have been asked to speak or preach at the installation of 3 new ministers, one in Newburyport next Sunday morning, and then again in the afternoon in Brookline, and a couple of weeks later in Littleton. And these are enough varied audiences that I think I can get away with using the same sermon. I think. And so I'm going to try it out on you with adaptations, of course. And this reminds me a little bit of the old story told by Abraham Lincoln about the man who had been tarred and feathered and run out of town on a rail, and asked what he thought of this experience. The man said, "Except for the honor of it, I would have just as soon it was somebody else." And it is an honor to preach these services, but I would just as soon it was somebody else. Welcome, everybody. I neglected to mention that I'm the only one working around here this morning. I mean, Brad and Deb are in some southern clime, you know, with drinks and little umbrellas in them, and they're twirling those things around. And Annie this morning is in Oakland, California, where she is participating in a rigorous anti-racism seminar for white social justice activists. But that means when it comes to doing everything and sweeping the floor, I seem to be it. And so I thought I'd tell a time for all ages while I'm at it. And this, too, is something you may recall from another time. It's a Taoist fable. Once there was a Chinese farmer who was given a horse, but the next day the horse ran away. The farmer's neighbor said, "Oh, that's bad news." But the farmer said, "Good news, bad news, who's to say?" Well, pretty soon, the horse came back, and the horse brought with it a friend. And you might say that was good news. And so the farmer gave the extra horse to his son. And the son rode the horse, and on his very first ride, he fell, and he broke his leg. And the concerned neighbor said, "Ooh, that's bad news." But the farmer said, "Good news, bad news, who's to say?" And so the next week, the emperor's men came to town, and they rounded up all of the able-bodied men in the village so they could go fight in the war. But because the son's leg was broken, he was spared, and he didn't have to go. You might say that was good news, but altogether now, let's hear what the farmer had to say. Good news, bad news, who's to say? Well, there are various things that one might make of a story like this. Sometimes there is good news inside of bad news. Sometimes there is a silver lining. And sometimes there is a dark cloud, some bad news inside of good news. Wisdom would have it for us not to rely so much on categories of good and bad, but to instead look at a larger perspective. And if one looks at a larger perspective, it actually can make us calmer, and it can allow us to take more risks. Good news, bad news, who's to say? Well, kids and teachers are going to go to their classes, and meanwhile, as they go, we're going to sing. We're going to sing "Gather the Spirit." It is number 347. Here comes a bonus reading, a poem, an excerpt from a poem titled Parable of the Talents by Octavia Butler. I've just recently been introduced to Octavia Butler. She is an African-American science fiction writer and poet. These are her words. Here we are, energy, mass, life, shaping life, mind, shaping mind, God, shaping God. Consider, we are born not with purpose, but with potential. To survive, let the past teach you. Past customs, struggles, leaders and thinkers, let these help you. Let them inspire you, warn you, give you strength. But beware. God is change. Past is past. What was cannot come again. To survive, know the past. Let it touch you. Then let the past go. Purpose unifies us. It focuses our dreams, guides our plans, strengthens our efforts. Purpose defines us, shapes us, and offers us greatness. We can, each of us, do the impossible as long as we can convince ourselves that it has been done before. And for something completely different, words of the prophet Willie Nelson. There are more serious problems in life than financial ones, and I've had a lot of those. I've been broke before and will be again. Heartbroke? That's serious. Lose a few bucks? That's not. Freely we have received. Freely give. For the good work of this congregation within and far, far beyond these walls, I invite you to lose a few bucks at least.
Faith that
Lovely. I'm not the only one working here today. The choir is working, and while just a second, I'm not done yet. And while Brad is twirling that umbrella in his drink, Janet is leading the choir, and then we got ushers and greeters, and Bob's up there doing the videotaping, and teachers, and Steve Sussman tickling the ivories. Who? Oh, Bill Rabino. Oh, yes, let's not forget. And, listening to this is your job. I'll begin with a story that may or may not have much to do with this sermon, but it does have a good deal of self-deprecating mirth, and without it, this sermon would be sadly lacking in mirth, which is never good. This is a story about church life and ministry, and it takes place more than 20 years, maybe 25 years ago, here in Bedford, and it has to do with the Christmas Eve service. Christmas Eve, in my experience, is all about joyous anticipation, eager expectation, jangled nerves, the fulfillment of long-awaited desires, and the coming of, some would have it, a Savior. So, you see, it's sort of like the installation of a new minister, right? At last! Happy days are here again. And so I'd fretted about preparing the perfect Christmas Eve service. And so I had a brainstorm that a newcomer to our congregation, a woman who was a recent emigre from the Soviet Union, could tell a lovely Russian Christmas story. And as a bonus, I bought more than 200 fresh white roses to give to everyone. I'm not sure why exactly, but it seemed like a grand gesture. Well, the way it turned out, the Russian emigre had taken up with a man in the parish, and in the course of things, this broke up a long-standing relationship that man had with another woman in the parish, and thus a good many of the jilted woman's friends were in church that Christmas Eve thinking, how dare this male minister invite that woman to speak from our pulpit? And they stared daggers at me. It's never good when, before you have said a thing, the congregation is staring daggers. And then the emigre woman's long and rather odd holiday story, reindeer and sleighs and snowdrifts and I don't know what else. She began in such a thick Russian accent that I had to stand next to her to translate her English into English. And as for the white roses, as soon as I handed them out, they immediately wilted and turned limp and black. And even though the candles did not catch things on fire and bring the fire department, that was another year in another church, it nonetheless was a terrible service. I knew it, and I had no one else to blame but me. I hate it when that happens. When Eventually, the horrible, terrible, no good, very bad service was over. I readied myself to go to a parishioner's house after party, where no doubt people would avoid talking with me about the aforesaid shudder-worthy service. But every Christmas Eve, I make a large batch of hot chocolate. And that night, I figured I'd take what was left over to the party. And thus, I carried a large and heavy percolator of hot chocolate. This is the very same percolator urn. I carried it out the front door toward my car, except that it being a wondrously snowy and icy Christmas Eve, I slipped on the brick walk in front of the church, fell soundly on my butt, which allowed me, lying on the pavement, to see a wave of hot chocolate rise from the urn in a perfect arc. And oh, so perfectly, it fell on my head and my glasses, and the hot, sweet mess soaked my hair and shirt and tie and suit. No wonder a colleague says his favorite holiday memory is to see on Christmas Eve the receding image of the church in the rear view mirror of his car. When welcoming a Savior, know that you're just as likely to land on your butt covered by a hot mess. And this, again, is analogous to the installation of a new minister. I have slipped and fallen, disappointed others, and disappointed myself many, many times in my ministry. Ministers and congregations regularly disappoint one another. Services that fall flat and comedic pratfalls are the least of our downfalls, for we have and do and will let one another down, make mistakes, miss cues, lose opportunities, and blow it. Churches are in the business of proclaiming hope. And well, that's hard to do when you're not always feeling it. These dark days especially, I ask, "How are you?" And I'm much more likely to hear expressions of anger and apprehension, fear and dull dyspepsia than I am to hear anybody say, "I sure am feeling hopeful." Hopeful for what? Next year's Patriots season? I don't think so. Spring, I suppose. Robert Mueller? Kamala Harris, maybe? You know, the candidate I'm supporting is Eugene Debs, who once said, "I would not be a Moses to lead you into the promised land, because if I could lead you into it, somebody else could lead you out of it." This morning, I want briefly to reflect on the nature of hope. I think that there are implications as relevant to our own personal, private struggles with hopelessness, Today's special occasion to keep hope alive between a new minister and a congregation, and as well our challenge to be hopeful in the face of, for lack of better words, global illiberalism, authoritarianism, and kleptocracy. In 1915, amidst the despairing mess that was the First World War, Virginia Woolf wrote in her diary, "The future is dark, which is, on the whole, the best thing the future can be, I think." She's saying that the future is unknown, neither bright nor horrible, and that we ought not confuse the one with the other. We sometimes say that we live in unsettled times, but you know, that's a good thing, because if things were settled, well, it's over. It's fated. It's determined. It's done. When things are unsettled, we have the opportunity to be hopeful. You know, the act of installing a minister is the culmination of a process known as settling a minister. I am here to say that nothing is settled. Nothing. A settled minister, like a settled congregation, is a minister or a congregation in trouble or dead. Don't settle for anything less than an unsettled minister and an unsettled congregation. Moreover, to live in a dark and unsettled time calls for us to be deliberately, determinedly hopeful. I'm influenced by a little book given to me by a parishioner titled Hope in the Dark by Rebecca Solnitz. In it, she says, and the quote is at the top of your order of service, "Hope is not like a lottery ticket you can sit on the sofa and clutch, feeling lucky. Hope is an axe you break down doors with in an emergency." We'll talk more about emergencies in a minute. Hope should shove you out the door because it will take everything you have to steer the future away from endless war, from the annihilation of the earth's treasures and the grinding down of the poor and marginal. Hope just means another world might be possible. Not promised, not guaranteed. Hope calls for action. Action is impossible without hope. To hope is to give yourself to the future, and that commitment to the future makes the present inhabitable. Isn't that really what all of us want? To make the present inhabitable. One of Solnitz's chapters is titled "Getting the Hell Out of Paradise." And in it, she cautions us not to be duped by notions of either hell or paradise. We are Universalists, and you'll remember that Universalist steeple bells ring to the tune of "No hell, no hell, no hell." So we're on board with that. Things are hellish enough this side of the grave. But neither should we be duped by notions of paradise. Paradise, Solnitz says, is not the place in which you arrive, but the journey toward it. The industrialized world, she says, has tried to approximate paradise in its suburbs with lux, calm, volupté cul-de-sacs. I love this little line of things. She says lux, and lux is spelled L-U-X-E. That's lux to the max. And calm is C-A-L-M-E. That is calm to the max. Volupte, I had to look that one up. V-O-L-U-P-T, accent on the E, and that is voluptuousness to the max. And so she's saying the industrialized world has tried to approximate paradise in its suburbs with lux, calm, volupte, cul-de-sacs, roads to nowhere, cable television, and two-car garages, and it has produced a soft ennui. I even had to remember what ennui means, and ennui has to do with dissatisfaction and weariness and boredom. Soft ennui that shades over into despair and a decay of the soul, suggesting that paradise is already a gulag. Remember, she's talking about suburbs here as approximations of paradise. And she says, countless desperate teenagers will tell you so. For paradise does not require of us courage, selflessness, creativity, passion. Paradise is passive, sedative, soulless. As Unitarian Universalists, we are called to live soulful lives of courage, selflessness, creativity, and passion. But if we are to live our values, we must get the hell out of paradise. Solnitz recalls that the central motif in all of Judeo-Christianity is capital P, paradise, and the capital F, fall. Paradise and fall. And now, if I were a really creative minister, I'd make a connection between the fall and me falling on my ass on Christmas Eve, but I will leave that part up to you. I have, however, learned that there were some Christian heretics who worshiped Eve. They worshiped Eve because she was the one to liberate humanity from paradise. This is called the myth of the fortunate fall. The myth of the fortunate fall. And if you Google that, as I did, you will discover that that myth has been life-saving, salvific to oppressed and marginalized people, political prisoners in all kinds of gulags. The myth of the fortunate fall can be life-saving and hope-inducing to us as well, for it illustrates our good fortune to be banished from the despair of hell as from the delusion of soulless, laid-back paradise. Instead, we are called out into the great, open, windy, muddy, slippery, horrific, beatific, icy, rainy, uncertain world. Every victory must be temporary or incomplete. One of my predecessors as minister here in Bedford was a man named Napoleon W. Lovely. Oh, how lovely to be named Napoleon. And he said, though our knowledge is incomplete and our truth partial and our love imperfect, we believe that new light is ever waiting to break through individual hearts and minds to enlighten our ways, that there is mutual strength in willing cooperation, and that the bonds of love keep open the gates of freedom. He is talking about hope. Hope as an axe to use in an emergency. Inside the word emergency, remember, is emerge. For it is from an emergency that new things come forth. Make no mistake, there is no emergency on our southern border, but you and I know that we are living in a time of emergency. Last week I heard an NPR interview with David Wallace Wells, who is the author of a new book, The Uninhabitable Earth, in which he describes hope as a matter of perspective. For example, the common wisdom used to be that a positive outcome of our climate crisis would be by the end of this century to hold climate warming to between 0 degrees and 2 degrees. Now it seems certain that we will warm minimally by 2 degrees and quite possibly by 4 degrees. At 2 degrees, the minimum, there will be a death toll of 150 million people. That's the best case and most hopeful scenario. At 4 degrees, the impact on sea rise and agriculture and public health is just, well, beyond comprehension. And despite this horror, Wallace Wells remains hopeful because he says every fraction means averting some suffering or causing more suffering. And while it's already too late to avert anything south of 2 degrees, it is never too late to change the course of our warming and make lives more prosperous, healthier, safer, and more abundant and happier going forward. Facing the certainty of 150 million deaths and still staying hopeful, that's a guy who knows how to use hope as an axe to shove you out the door, who knows how to keep the emerge in emergency, a guy who has gotten the hell out of paradise. Now, I don't want to sugarcoat this sermon with too much good news, but there is some good news. The invention of Viagra, for example, is saving endangered species by eliminating the demand for aphrodisiacs made from green turtles, seahorses, geckos, and the velvet from half-grown antlers of caribou. There are wolves again in Yellowstone. Deer, moose, bear, cougars, and coyotes are coming back in droves, and some of them are showing up for ice cream at Bedford Farms. In California, there are seeds that lie dormant for decades and germinate only after fire, causing some of the burned over places to bloom most lavishly. The number of Native American people identifying as Native American in this country has doubled between the 1990 and 2000 census. And I never knew that in 1999, Inuit culture and language in Canada were saved by the creation of the province of Nunavut. 3 times the size of Texas, 10 times the size of Britain, 1/5 of all Canada. How many of you knew that? Some of you knew that. And while I don't underestimate the danger of their death throes, white supremacy and patriarchy show ample capacity to self-destruct. Well, that's enough good news and bad news. Good news? Bad news? Who's to say? Virginia Woolf said, "The future is dark, which is, on the whole, the best thing that the future can be, I think." Welcome to a dark, unsettled ministry with a dark, unsettled congregation. There is nothing better and perhaps nothing more difficult. May your bonds of love keep open the gates of freedom. Have a nice trip to paradise. And if you get to those pearly gates, get the hell out. Return to the great, open, windy, muddy, slippery, horrific, beatific, icy, rainy, uncertain world. Watch your step. Don't trip on the ice. But when you fall, consider it your good fortune to get up again and again. That's what I've got to say. Voice Still and Small is our hymn. It's number 391. What the heck? Let's do that one more time. Henry David Thoreau. A man is not his hope, nor his despair, nor yet his past deed. We know not yet what we have done, still less what we are doing. Wait till evening, and other parts of our day's work will shine that we had thought at noon, and we shall discover the real purport of our toil. As when the farmer has reached the end of the furrow and looks back, he can tell best where the pressed earth shines most. Amen. So may it be.